Today, I'm going to rank Genshin characters from the least to the most meta-defining. You will be surprised to know who's in B tier. First up, we have Albedo. Now, he's just kind of mid, so I would say, yeah, vegetarian chicken. He's got his uses in like Mono Geo and stuff, but aside from that, he's just kind of like meh. Then we have Amber. Thing is, her only use is running LOG in Hu Tao VV vape teams. Otherwise, just kinda like whatever. So she's down here fairly low. Ayaka. Now, while Freeze has fallen off in Abyss quite a bit, when it's relevant, it's still quite strong. And not only that, but Ayaka's burst is still highly capable of dishing like 1 million damage and whatnot. So yeah, she's still very powerful in that regard. I would say she's around here. Decent DPS. Barbara, who's honestly just a really like free-to-play option in some Bloom teams, but apart from that, you're pretty much never gonna want to use her. She's suboptimal, like anywhere you can put her. She's down here. Sure, she's Hydro, but she is the worst Hydro. Beidou, who's also just pretty mid nowadays. Unfortunately, Dendro meta kind of killed her off. She has her uses. However, generally, she's just like a little bit better than Albedo. Next up, we have Benny Boy. I don't think I need to explain why he deserves this spot. Yeah, it's Bennett. Then we have D-Luke, and he's like middle of the road. I feel like a lot of people do think that he's a lot worse than he actually is. He's just like fine. And you know what? That's respectable enough. Chongyun. Now, he also generally just does not have that much use nowadays. I mean, yeah, you can play him in Reverse Smelt, and that's not too bad. That's a decent team, but generally, you're not going to use him outside of that very much, and there's other much better options there too. So, Chongyun kind of gets the short end of the stick. Next up, we have Diona, a pretty decent cryo shielder. So I'm gonna put her right up here. She's good cryo battery, good healer, good shielder, and yeah, she's generally a decent mitigation option if you're able to use her. Vishal. Alright, now we know how she just busted into the meta with Aggravate. She was already very good before in Taser. Just a really great unit overall, very flexible, very strong sub DPS, especially in single target, very powerful, great repositioning and everything. Pretty excellent unit, deserves the high spot. Next up is who I personally believe is, if anything, on the same level as Ayaka, which some people might disagree with that, but you know, remember, there was that one Abyss, 3.7 Abyss, which was really hard, and Ganyu Melt was one of the few teams that was flexible enough to deal damage and clear that Abyss comfortably. Next up is Hu Tao, very powerful pyro DPS, and personally, I believe that if you can play her well, she is extremely strong. However, if you can't play her, she moves down to here. I have to be completely honest, if you cannot play her, she does move down. However, if you can play her, you can yield the absolute ceiling of single target pyro damage. Very good DPS. Yeah, if you're willing to invest the time into learning her, but yeah, great unit. So now we move on to Jean. So with Jean, she's Anemo, which does give her like a slight edge because, you know, Anemo's a pretty great element. However, unfortunately, she doesn't have that many good uses. Here's the thing, what does she have? You can use her in Sunfire, and you can also use her in Shout teams if you have a couple of cons on her. But then there's Farazan, so what's the point? Jean's just kinda in an awkward position. I mean, she's a standard 5-star, but generally not too great. Kaya is just in a similar boat of just not really having anything to do. Sure, you can shove him in like Reverse Melt or a Freeze team, but he's generally not going to be that good of an option. So yeah, Kaya sits down here next to Jean. And then we have Keqing. For a standard unit, she honestly is pretty good. Really nice aggravate damage. It really pulled her out of a tough spot. Tons of Electro application, which is good for that Visual A4. And yeah, overall, a pretty good pick. Clay does pretty decent pyro damage. Yes, her kit is very clunky, and she's kind of annoying to play, and in terms of pull value, it's extremely low because so many other 5-star units just fulfill the role that she does, but better. However, her damage output is solid. Next up, we have Lisa, and oh look, we've got a little Favonius party going on here. While she can deal in Hyper Bloom, and she can do some things for like, I don't know, Super Conduct Eula, she's not that great. There's usually almost always better options for her, and she's very much just kind of like the free-to-play choice if you don't have any other Electro enabler. We're gonna rate Dendro Traveler since that's the only Traveler element that I believe is actually worth talking about. I'd say that she's about here. Nice Dendro application, gets the job done if you don't have Nahida or any other Dendro applicator for your teams. And yeah, pretty solid, very simple kit. There's not much more to say about her. Mona, I'm gonna put below Klee here. That burst omen of hers is very nice for units like Ayaka. She's actually a pretty good flex unit for Neuvalet, able to enable him some really strong charge attacks. Good in freeze in general. Just a very limited range of Hydro application, but she's there. All right standard unit, and you can use her situationally. Next up is Ningguang. So, thing is, she's really not that useful nowadays. So I'm unfortunately just gonna put her here. She's a Geo DPS with not much prospects here. She can't even use Goro because she scales on attack. She's unfortunately done pretty dirty. Then we have Noelle, who is pretty much facing the same issue. Well, no, I'd say a bit better than Ningguang because at least she can use Goro. But aside from that, yeah, they're pretty much on the same level. Both just Geo DPSs that can't really do much. Here you have Chi-Chi, like, what would you expect? Then we have Razor. So you can play him in Thundering Fury, but aside from that, physical damage, it's pretty much dead. There's not really much you can do with it. He slots in pretty nicely just around here. Sucrose, I'm actually gonna put here at the top of Mid-Arrow because the thing is, while you could argue on paper she has the strength of Kazuha, which is not necessarily wrong, in practice she is extremely clunky. The C6 doesn't really count because it almost never properly works, but she does still provide a ton of value, which is how she earns such a high spot. Now, Child, huge on International, best team in the game, and while most players do struggle to play it to its fullest potential, when you do, you get insane clear times. You can clear stuff in less than 30 seconds and not as a whale, like just as like a regular player. Now with Venti, it's an interesting case. My best girl Venti here is situationally, he can be like S tier, situationally, he's just like down here. It really depends on the content. So if we're going to average it out, I'm gonna put him here. So yeah, I'd say he's kind of middle of the road, and generally the abysses where he does work, he works very well. So that's his case. Then for Xiangling Impact, well, we all know how much DPS she does, a nice pyro damage dealer. She's next to Child tier because they pretty much both do 50-50 of International's overall team damage. So if you say Xiangling does a lot of damage, then Child also does a lot of damage. We all know her legacy, insane pyro unit, fits into so many teams. The Bennett Xiangling core is eternal. So the next up here, we have Xiao, and he is very strong, especially at the introduction of C6 Farazan. Really good AoE, still competent in single target, excellent with the 5-star weapon. That's his main drawback, is he's not free-to-play friendly, but, you know, with the proper weapon and the proper team, he is very strong. Arguably one of the best teams in the game, Xiao Hypercarry, very powerful DPS unit. Next up is Xingqiu, really powerful unit, super good Hydro application, a lot of stuff built into his kit, like damage reduction and healing, and those rain swords have just such good Hydro application. Really good. You put Sack Sword on him, really nice Hydro battery for Yelan as well, and just pairs up really nicely with Yelan, just in general. So yeah, a really contested unit in just so many teams, and overall, very, very powerful. Like, good sub DPS as well. Then we have Xinyan, who does, like, next to nothing. Yeah, you can play her in Mono Pyro, but there's, like, literally much better units that you can do that with. Then, next up, we have Zhongli. Fairly good mitigation unit, really strong shield, and as we've seen with like the introduction of Neuvalet, shields are becoming more valuable, and with other units such as Xiao, for example, you can really appreciate the shield. It does depend on your account, obviously, like who do you actually play, because not every account needs Zhongli, but for the people who can benefit from him, also just very comfortable to use in general. So then we move on to Rosaria, and I'm going to put Rosaria here, just behind Diona, because they kind of do a similar thing. In freeze teams, they battery. Of course, Rosaria can provide some really nice sub DPS, provides a really nice reverse melt team, and also it's pretty good in physical teams with that C6 of hers. Pretty good unit. And honestly, physical is just not good. So Eula was just kind of doomed from the beginning. Really backloaded unit. Overall, there is almost always a better DPS option to employ. Like, as you can see, if Klee is higher than you, then you know there's a problem. Unfortunately, Eula's got the short end of the stick too. Yunfei is just a little bit higher than Eula, and she's a pretty good 4-star pyro DPS for what she is. You can also use her as a shielder at C4, so she has her uses. However, you know, you wouldn't use her much over the many other pyro DPS options that we currently already have, especially when units like Shangling are free. Next up is Kazjire, who I'm just gonna throw way up here. Really powerful unit, because think of the top 10 best teams in the game, or just something roughly around that. How many of them use Kazjire in them? How many of the best teams use Kazjire? That should answer your question. He really does deserve to be considered the best or not. Like, he brings quite a lot to the table. He has a really valuable kit, really nice damage buffing, really nice grouping overall, and is synergistic with just nearly everything. Next up, we have Yoimiya, and know that the reason she's not next to Hu Tao, because their damage is actually very similar. It's not a damage issue. It's more that with Hu Tao, you can more easily run her without a shielder, whereas with Yoimiya, you have to run some kind of like mitigation unit with her to prevent her from getting knocked over. And also, if more than 2 enemies appear on field, I mean, of course, Hu Tao is kind of similar, but like she's not completely locked to single target. She's single target oriented, whereas Yoimiya is just completely single target locked. She can only hit 1 enemy at a time. So that's why she's down here. Her output is pretty decent, but unfortunately, it's just some external issues that hold her back. Next up, we have Sayu, who I'm going to put here. She's Animo, so that means that at least there's like that one use she has of applying 4 VV if you really have 0 other options. She can heal as well, so there's something, but apart from that, you're almost never going to use Sayu. Her skill is only practical for exploration. In the Abyss, it almost never matters, and you can only really use her for some like goofy fun teams, but aside from that, yeah, not much else. Then we have the almighty Narukami Agosho, God of Thunder, Her Excellency Raiden Shogun, and I believe she's definitely a very strong unit, enables some really powerful teams, and she has quite a good variety of teams she can play in as well. She's great for both free-to-plays and, you know, more experienced players, and even at C0, she's very powerful, really good all-rounder unit, and those multiple teams she enables are all quite strong. So next up we have Kujosara. For all these niche support characters, I'm going to be ranking them based on the assumption that you have the correct teams that they're going to play in. Because obviously, if you don't have the teams that they play in, then they don't mean anything to you. But if you do, that's when we can start to rank them more fairly, in comparison to other teammates you could use with said teams. So with Kujosara, she is for Raiden Shogun. There's not really any of her units she synergizes that well with. So I'm going to say she's around here, because more often than not, you can just put Fischl in her place and she will do the job better. So then next up we have Kokomi, who I believe is just better than Zhongli, because, you know, Hydro, really great element, really good application, super good in Bloom. With Alloy, pretty much her only use is that she can produce cryo energy particles, but apart from that, you're pretty much just never using Alloy. She's completely forgotten about in this game. I don't know anyone plays this character. So yeah, she's just kind of here. She's not too good. Okay, to add Thoma into this list, gonna have to do a little bit of reshuffling here. So I'm gonna move these 2 down a tier simply because Thoma, I would say, is around here. And this might seem a bit confusing, but let me explain. So the thing with Zhongli is that he is really versatile, but he doesn't have one team where he's just definitively the best. Whereas Kokomi, she has 2 teams where she is definitively really great. Now, Thoma is kind of a mix of the two, where he's somewhat versatile, and he has like a team where he's also really solid, that being Burgeon. As for Burgeon is pretty much just AoE Hyper Bloom. It requires next to no investment, like it's very cheap to build, and it takes off extremely well. So for that reason, Thoma is actually better than a lot of people might think. Ito, he goes up here, really strong raw damage. Honestly, pretty great performance from him. The main issue with him is he can't shield break because he's Geo, and being Geo does hold him back, but he has like an ideal best in slot team. He's just high investment. You have to invest a lot to get the stuff out of him, but when you do get the stuff out of him, it's impressive. Like, he does perform well. Goro is a bit awkward because he's Ito's best buffer for sure. Really strong Ito buffer. But if you don't have Ito, he is dead on your account. So I'm gonna average it out and put him somewhere in the middle here. I'll put him with Albedo and with Shenhe. Now, if we're assuming that you have Ganyu and Ayaka, super strong units, the best cryo buffer, premium cryo buffer, so I would say just to average it out, I'll put her up here because, you know, she does her job very well, and, you know, she is a premier cryo buffing unit. So if you love cryo, I can say, I can vouch, I have a C2R1 Shenhe. I'm very happy with it. And I definitely recommend her if you're a cryo enthusiast. Then we have Yunjin, and once again, she's a niche support. She only really has a use for Yoimiya, and she's actually a really big Yoimiya buff. Like, she's very good with her. So I'm gonna put her in the same leagues as Goro here, because once again, I'm averaging it out. Next up is Miko, and I'm gonna put her up here. Yai Aggravate is a super strong team. Like, it's a really good team, one of the best you can play, and just the strongest Aggravate team in general. So absolutely recommend for those Aggravate enthusiasts out there. Takes very good advantage of Nahida too, and the buffs she provides thanks to that split scaling of her, EM and all that. So very powerful, aged super well. Gonna have to do a bit of reshuffling here again, because personally, I don't know if I would put Ito above Ayaka, just because Ayaka does so much damage with her burst. Of course, point still stands that he does a lot of really good damage, but I feel like it's just a bit awkward to have him so high there. This next one I'm ecstatic about. Ayato goes here. He is useless now that Neuvillette has come out, and that is great to me. And Childhood already beat him for the longest time in International. Like, Ayato could just never hold a candle. But now that Neuvillette is out, there is no reason to pull for him anymore. Like, except ease of use over Child, and except because Neuvillette is kind of expensive to play for free-to-plays, because you need his C1 or you need his weapon, one of the two. So, those are the only incentives. But pretty much every other 5-star Hydra unit is better than him. Yolan is pretty much just on the same level as Xingqiu, if not even better, because of the high amount of damage that she provides. They're a really great duo together, truly. Yolan is so powerful. The A4 ramping buff she has is insane. She fits into so many teams, she made so many units better, and overall, very meta-defining. Excellent unit. Next up is Shinobu. Now, I have criminally underrated her in a lot of my other tier lists, but here I am, doing her justice properly now, and her teams, her Dendro teams, are very strong. She also is very convenient in Hyperbloom teams, because whenever you use Raiden, you do get more power out of it, but the thing with Kuki is, first of all, there's no more opportunity cost. You can use Raiden for a more valuable team. And second of all, Kuki heals, which is something that Raiden doesn't do, so you get more comfortability, and you're able to just, slap all that EM on her, and she just does really well. So yeah, a really good Dendro unit, super cheap, low investment to take off, and anyone can understand and pick her up. Unfortunately, Hazel's just in that awkward spot where he doesn't have anything to do in this meta. Like, he really is just kind of like there. Like, the character himself is funny, okay? I love his hangout quest, but the actual meta value of this guy, he's unfortunately just without a best in slot team. He's without a team where he's even like ideal to use. You can just really cope with him as a driver unit or as a TDDS unit, but there is almost always going to be a better choice for that. Then we have to take Nari, who I'm gonna put here. He's the best standard DPS unit in the game right now, or at least tied with Keqing, and very powerful Dendro ranged unit. Overall, very satisfactory. If you get him, give him a go. You'll be surprised at how good he is. Now for Kale, I'm gonna sandwich in here. Yeah, Dendro is a great element, and just by association with Dendro, that already puts her in mid-tier. But the thing is, her Dendro application is a very small AoE, and she just doesn't really do much else apart from apply that tiny amount of Dendro. And also, not to mention that Dendro application does not have a very long uptime, so she's just like the free-to-play Dendro pick if you have nothing better. Next up, we have Dori. And the thing with Dori is that the kit itself is not the problem, because just healing and applying Electro, it's not horrible on its own. It's just every other Electro unit does this better. Like, Fischl completely trumps this unit. Like, there's no reason for Dori to exist when Fischl and Keqing exist, for example. She's just in a really awkward position of not needing to exist. Nilu's another unit that I just didn't do justice before. The AoE she does is insane. Just that's it. It is so powerful. She's easily become one of the best teams in the game that you can play. She's super free-to-play friendly, and she's also got like really nice high investment options too. Like C2 Nahida or Kaj Nisut or Thousand Floating Dreams. You've just generally got a lot of flexibility within the archetype, if you know what I mean. Like, if for a healer, you don't have to use Kokomi, you can use Baiju, you can use Karara, you can use Kave, and whatnot. And so you have a lot of options within the archetype. and it costs barely any investment to take off. So while the unit herself is very simple, she's just like an Ascension passive to the Bloom reaction. She's still so valuable to Bloom teams. Like, she makes Bloom work. If you want to play Bloom teams, you use this unit. Next up, we have Cyno, who I'm gonna put here below Rosaria. Thing is that Raiden just beats him in every aspect. There's no reason to use Cyno if you have Raiden. And subsequently, there's no reason to use Cyno if you have Keqing, because if you're playing Aggravate, Keqing wins. Playing Hyper Bloom, Raiden wins, or Cookie wins. So he's just kind of in this awkward spot where he's very unnecessary. And yes, his numbers are honestly pretty good. Like, it's not that his damage is bad. It's just that compared to these other units, there is almost next to no reason to use him, unfortunately. Then we have Countess, who is pretty much just the same level as Barbara. Not really much reason to use her. You can use her in some, like, very niche Hyper Bloom setups, but apart from that, there's no point. Then we have Nahida. So if you play Dendro, then, like, she's obviously one of the best units you can use. Arguably the most powerful Archon in the game as of now. We'll have to wait to next patch to see if Furina changes that, but it is insane how strong she is. She revolutionized the meta completely, really good in every Dendro team, and a lot of Dendro teams are, like, top teams nowadays. Like Bloom, like Yai Aggravate. She completely pulled some characters out of their, like, deathbeds, like Keqing. She really did add a lot to the game, and is also just really strong in that regard. So, very, very powerful unit. And I'm saying that as someone who hates the character design, hates the character personality. Everything about this character I detest, but I can just acknowledge how powerful she is. So then we have Layla, who's pretty much just the same level as Diona, and they do like the same thing. Maybe Layla's just a bit better. Wanderer, similar situation. They do like the same thing. They play like the same teams. It's just that, personally, I think she has a little better, but they're on like the same level. Then we have Baruzan. So once again, I'm going to be judging this assuming that you have a Wanderer to play with or a Shao to play with, and that as far as it's C6. If we make that assumption, then she is honestly one of the best buffers in this game that you can use. She's absolutely insane. I would even say that she's about here if you have the required conditions to make the most use out of her. Very, very powerful unit. So if granted that you're actually able to take advantage of what she offers. And if she's not C6, then she's a lot more deadweight. But with those max cons, she's part of the reason why Animo DPS units are so strong nowadays. So then we have Yao Yao, who I'm gonna put here in between Diona because, you know, they're both like healer 4-star units. I mean, she applies Dendro, so, you know, naturally you can stick her in some Dendro teams. She's pretty nice in Keqing Aggravate. Just pretty nice in some Dendro teams overall. Put her in Bloom as well. And then Diona, you just use for the crowd teams. Really just depends on the teams you're playing, which one you want to use. And of course, for tankiness purposes, I'd say Layla still beats both of them. Now for Alhaitham, I'm gonna put him probably here. Very strong Dendro DPS. Alhaitham Quick Bloom, one of the strongest teams in the game right now. While he is difficult to play, you have to get the hang of him. He's very cheap to take off, and when you do learn how to play him, you get rewarded massively for it. Seriously, Alhaitham Quick Bloom is nuts. So, very good DPS. He's aged quite well, and I believe he's going to continue to age well. Oh no! We've moved on to this one now. Well, okay. Thing is, she's honestly found a little bit of a place for herself. You can play her in Linear Mono Pyro, you can play her in Ganyu Melt, and you know what? Compared to all these other units, at least she's okay there. So yeah, she doesn't do like any damage, but at least you can use her in those two positions, and she'll be fine. So then we have Mika, and the thing is, he is not even a good support for Eula, is the weirdest thing. He's just kind of like mid for Eula, and it's C6. He's competitive with Rosaria. So I'm gonna say that I would do this, but the thing is that the fact that he's not even that good with Eula makes me kind of meh about him. So I'm gonna put him just here because I don't know. I feel like for a niche support, he should be providing for his niche more. Kaveh just goes here. He doesn't really have that much use in this game. He's just kind of like there. He's not horrible, not by any means, but there's usually better options to choose. He just sort of exists. Then we have Baiju, a really good healer, nice Dendro application. He's also a help for some units like Sino, for example, who have really long field uptimes. Because he has a really nice uptime himself. Interesting mechanics, some mild buffing in his kit. Overall, quite a good Dendro unit. So then we move on to the cat girl, Kirara. Now, she's a Dendro shielder, so much like the Diona Yao Yao situation, I'd say she's just like above Layla. Use her in Dendro teams where she fits, or just use her in teams where she fits in general. Pretty nice unit. So next up is Lenny, and I had underrated him before because the thing is, he is actually better than a C0R1 Hu Tao because the thing with Lenny is he's not only good at single target, he's good at AoE as well. But he can do both super well. Really high pyro damage. The only thing I personally don't like about him is that his teammates are really expensive. You could replace him with Child and you get the best team in the game. Granted, if you're able to play the team properly. So that's my only gripe with him. But aside from that, yeah, he's honestly quite solid. Lynette's in the awkward position of not really having much that she can do. The only place where you could arguably put her, I guess, is like Kaching Aggravate. But even then, she doesn't have, she has basically no grouping. She has a taunt. She does have a taunt, but her grouping is very weak. And overall, pretty much any other VV holding unit can do more for you over Lynette. So yeah, just unfortunately, she doesn't have a best in slot team where she can really do super well for herself. Remnant, okay, he was a Shatter unit. The moment in the Hoyoverse drawing board room, they said, let's make a unit about Shatter. The writing was already on the wall for this dude's meta placement. Like, I am so sorry for a minute. You were done dirty by being made into a Shatter unit of all things. Unfortunately, very useless. So then we have Noivelet. He's honestly a very strong Hydro DPS. Really impressive. He's a dedicated Hydro DPS, not an enabler like Child, not a sub DPS like Yolan or anything. He's very powerful output, which is very impressive considering that his best in slot team probably doesn't even exist yet. We don't have a proper HP buffer, aside from like C4 Yolan, but who the frick has C4 Yolan except for Wales? And also, Furina's not out, and we can assume that Furina's gonna be a part of his best in slot team. Like if we just put 2 and 2 together. So his base power level, because that's basically what he's stuck at right now, is very high. So he's quite impressive, and I can honestly see him moving up the tier list in the future when he gets more options. Now for Rio Thesley. He's not out yet, but we can already infer that from his kit, and the fact he's gonna be just a reverse melt unit, and maybe he'll be like subpar and freeze, which like Ganyu and Ayaka already dominate that niche anyways. Yeah, he's just gonna kind of be mid, which does suck because I do love this character and his design and whatnot, but meta-wise, nah, yeah, he's not got it. He's just kind of middle of the road. Well then, now we have officially ranked every currently known character in this 4.1 tier list. Thank you for watching to the end, everyone. Leave a comment down below for what you thought of this tier list. I tried to improve my takes, I tried to improve my placements overall based on comments and feedback. Please let me know if you disagree with anything, and I am more than happy to take it into consideration for my next tier list. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed. This has been Juice, signing out, and I wish you all an S tier day.